welcome to Voices for Energy Justice, a podcast series produced by Uniting the Central Coast for Action, a program of the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition.
Shalonda Baker's visionary book, Revolutionary Power, provides two critical insights. One, we cannot address climate change without also taking on environmental justice. Two, the powers of the status quo will try to divide climate activists and the energy justice community. Overcoming this is the key to achieving the energy future we all deserve.
Two College Corps fellows inspired this podcast series and will be our hosts for the first two episodes. Listen in as they interview one energy justice leader from the community.
The California Public Utilities Commission, they're part of the problem. They're letting PG&E and all the other corporate utilities run amok on us, right? And so that's a big problem. And I think that system really needs a full gut because they're not holding PG&E accountable.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the series, Voices for Energy Justice. We are your hosts, Maya Petrovic and Riley Chase.
Maya and I are incredibly excited to be sitting down with Jessica Tovar, who has been on the front line of environmental justice and a true advocate for policy to protect vulnerable communities from the toxic effects of industrial pollution. Jessica is currently the Energy Democracy Director at Local Clean Energy Alliance. She grew up in Los Angeles, California, near industrial pollution corridors that led to instances of cancer in her family. Her proximity to the consequences of environmental injustice led her to pursue a career of policy advocacy for vulnerable communities, aiming to prevent and reduce local pollution and environmental impacts of an unjust energy system. Among her many accomplishments include in 2004, when Jessica helped shut down the PG&E Hunters Point power plant, and in 2010, she successfully led a campaign against the expansion of a Chevron refinery. Jessica has worked in a variety of urban, rural, and indigenous communities throughout California and Arizona for over a decade, truly impacting countless lives and fostering a movement towards a healthier and more equitable environment. Jessica, thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
Yes, of course. I'm doing great. I'm so glad to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. First of all, we're so sorry to hear about the health impacts that your family experienced. I'm interested in how that has motivated you to get involved with environmental justice work and led you to your current role.
Well, I would say, growing up as a child, a lot of my memories are of mostly being sick, mostly having to navigate a lot of headaches and, kind of allergies and just not feeling well in general. And so that's a lot of my memory. And then one day, a friend from high school who lived in a completely different neighborhood came to visit me and said, "Hey, Jessica, how come every time I come visit you, it always smells so bad?" And I never really thought about the smell too much, mostly because it always smelled like that. And I was used to it in some weird way. And just noticing that at the end of the day, like at night, the smells would be worse. So, and those smells obviously were coming from the myriad of different factories in my community, and a lot of them were crematoriums, not just for humans, but also animal carcasses, because there was a huge industrial slaughterhouse, which is the Farmer John's slaughterhouse in city of Vernon near Boyle Heights. And then there was all kinds of factories, and there was also a lot of sweatshops, like where clothing is made. So where I lived was actually housing projects. Mine was on a major boulevard, so a major corridor. So it was very common at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to hear the big rigs going by and the house shake. I would see this every day, and this is like metropolitan Los Angeles. Like, one doesn't equate, a major city with this kind of environment. But the neighborhood that I grew up in was right next to an all-industrial city known as the city of Vernon. And so that was, what I would see and smell every day. Another thing to add to the picture is there was a lot of like really huge power lines right next to my house, and even transformers. And I actually had seen some of these power lines break and live lines like fall where you have to like call, maybe even 911 because it could actually electrocute and kill somebody. And I've seen some of the transformers, pop and catch fire and explode, and all this was right door to my house. So, um, it was not normal. And after going into other communities, just really learning about this was an intentional design for poor people of color to live in communities like this, where, mostly richer and wider communities don't have this kind of industry and infrastructure in their backyard, essentially, right? As I became a young adult, my mom did get diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had to have a mastectomy. She's still alive today, but she's had a myriad of health problems and struggles. And then my grandmother developed breast cancer in her elderly age and eventually died from it.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry. And that's so tough as a kid. Like you're just, that's normal to you. Like you said, like that smell. And we talked about in our last conversation with Alexis Sutterman how that moment when like your bubble is popped, and you realize that, oh, in other places there's not this much pollution. There's green spaces to go play in, and the air is clean. It doesn't smell bad. That's like such a pivotal moment in our development and like in our trajectory as people who like care about the environment and environmental justice. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And our episode with Alexis went into depth with her about what energy democracy means to her. And I was just wondering if you could share what your vision of a true energy democracy would look like and how that differs from our current system.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think that energy democracy really is what energy should have always been, right? Where we decide what what kind of energy like powers our communities, and we decide, because I think, if communities were more engaged, we would not be choosing to put this in the backyard of like the poorest, most vulnerable communities. We would make a more educated decision about really A, reducing our consumption, B, prioritizing the cleanest possible energy in our communities and making it something that's good, like solar, creating clean energy jobs and employing, local people to work in this workforce. Because that's another thing to distinguish, right? It's like growing up in a polluted community that with all kinds of, corporate industrial practice, that's a lot of jobs and wealth that never reached my community or my family, right? And so, a democratized energy system is a system where we have a say in what it looks like, and it looks very different and is more solutionary than it is harmful, like our current system. And so to me, energy democracy is a energy system centered around people, and environment and a consciousness of doing the least harm.
That's like a really interesting point. I think that for the longest time, the environment and environmental protection was more focused on like oceans and birds, animals, and landscapes. And really, the environment is full of people, and people are who are suffering also from the environmental burdens of like polluting industries. So, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Would you be able to expand on how more localized and decentralized energy systems like microgrids have the potential to enhance community resilience and autonomy?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we really want to see and what we're trying to uplift is the building of this microgrid, more localized solar and storage in on top of our homes, in our neighborhoods, on our schools, places of worship. You imagine all these warehouses have so much rooftop space, right? and to be able to produce energy for our communities or our homes that's independent of the greater corporate grid, because we know that in crisis and in general, like corporate utilities are turning off power, right? Or turning off power, be it to prevent the next wildfire on a windy day. That's what they do. They abruptly shut off power. And then, in thinking about like growing up as a poor person, having your utilities shut off, I think that that's a very cruel practice, that when people are maybe lost their job or having trouble making ends meet, now the utility is going to put them out of having, lights and heat, or air conditioning, whatever it might be. And so, we need to really change that system. And the only way to do that, and then not depend so much on that larger infrastructure that it requires transmission lines, and that infrastructure that I've shared has caused wildfires or has caused, explosions in my community. It's like, it's a solution. It's a solution, a community-based solution. Those are local jobs that reduces local pollution. There's so many benefits that come from that. And when you have good paying jobs, good jobs, you're also improving, the safety and the health of your community, there's so many benefits that come from that. And then not depending on, the corporate utility. And the corporate utility has already shown that if they can't get their money, they could care less about us having access to, resilient energy.
Yeah, definitely. Connecting to that, the corporate utilities, we know you've had a super busy month working in opposition of PG&E's nuclear and AVA's community energy. I think that is a great example of what we were just saying about how not being so invested in the corporate energy and being able to have more autonomy in your community over their energy. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that campaign that you've been leading?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you probably know this better, who live in San Luis Obispo, but in the shadows of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant that's owned and operated by PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. But here in the East Bay and San Joaquin Valley, our local community choice program has been trying for years to take Diablo Canyon nuclear from PG&E and add it to its mix. And the issue with that is we advanced community choice programs throughout California to do better than the corporation, to do better than PG&E, and to actually offer true renewable, true clean energy, and actually make local investments in those microgrids and that other type of community-based infrastructure that we want to see. And we see nuclear as a distraction from actually doing true clean energy in our communities, right? And it's also perpetuating this long legacy of bad energy investments. It's like community choice should not be acting like the corporate utility. They have a responsibility to do better and to respond to their local constituency. So we've actually fought nuclear from Diablo Canyon, from PG&E in our community choice program 3 times in 2020 during the pandemic shutdown. We were successful the first 2 times. The last time they decided to take the energy and try to sell it on the energy market. And we told them, look, another smaller community choice program already set a precedent saying that you can't really sell this energy. There's not really a market in the state of California for this nuclear. And as a matter of fact, the state's been trying to move away and phase out nuclear, right? Um, and that was a whole other fight at that time, because we were also saying, hey, there's a whole movement to try to move Diablo Canyon into full decommissioning and shutdown. We don't want to keep the door open in extending the life of an aging nuclear power plant, and just recognizing that as long it's actually in PG&E's advantage to keep that power plant open, despite whether it's functioning or not, because they nickel and dime ratepayers, right? They charge community choice customers through something called the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment, or the PCIA, and they keep us on the hook in paying them. They keep saying that, well, you left us for a community choice program, and we have these I'll call it bad investments that they invested in long term. And they're like, well, somebody has to pay for it. And so as long as they can keep that power plant open, the nuclear power plant, they can justify nickel and diming community choice customers. And so, that nuclear offer from PG&E to community choice programs throughout the state of California is attached to strings, and that string goes back to PG&E. And the whole point of community choice is to start cutting those strings, right? Start moving away and doing better in terms of clean energy investments like local solar and storage. And so the one thing I really want to emphasize is it's a false solution to climate change. It is definitely a distraction and a delay. I've heard it many a times said, oh, but it's like the bridge energy to getting to this transition. We've been hearing that for like forever. And it's like, at what point are we actually gonna, really start that transition? So it's been our job to push back and fight. And so right now we have a petition for individuals to sign on. We have an organizational sign on. And, we're doing everything we can to really uplift the true life cycle of nuclear energy, which never goes away, right? Like the actual waste has like an indefinite life, right? The fact that it's mined, dumped in indigenous communities, right? The fact that there's no real permanent way to deal with the waste, to manage the waste, like you all who live there are living with the waste at the site of the power plant. Like that in itself is concerning. It's a day-to-day like threat, right? And it's a threat for the people who live there. It's a threat for the people that work there. And so we need to not be participating in reinvigorating and rebranding this dangerous, dirty stuff. And then the last thing I want to say, as much as people tout it as carbon free or greenhouse gas free, when you take in consideration all the energy that goes into the transport and the operations, that's all greenhouse gases that are not being taken into account. And so it's false to say that it's actually clean.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a big, like, key theme that we're seeing is just how important it is to look at things holistically and like the entire life cycle. You can't just choose to focus on one part and then neglect everything else. And we know that you've been such a pivotal force in your community's fight against nuclear. So thank you so much for sharing your insight about it.
Yeah, thank you for your insight. Back to the idea you were explaining about localized energy. How can that type of transition to clean energy create jobs and build wealth in historically marginalized communities?
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity. We mentioned, solar and storage and microgrids in our communities, but there's other, aspects of clean energy that create jobs and actually help reduce our bills. Giving the example of I mentioned, we need to reduce our consumption, that's the fancy word is demand response programs, right? We need to make our homes and our buildings more energy efficient so that you don't have to run your air conditioner all day to keep the house cool, or your heater all day, right? If it's well sealed, windows are well sealed, you have, efficiency in terms of like the walls and if you need to heat the home, you might need to heat it for an hour and then you could turn the heater off. But a home that's really inefficient in order to stay warm runs a heater all day. That's a waste of energy, right? And so, yeah, so doing the energy efficiency. And then the next step would be doing electrification of the homes, that fuel switching, switching out gas appliance to the electric ones and reducing, pollution inside the home. And that paired with the microgrid, is smart. And we should be doing that not just for our homes, but for our schools, for our places of worship, for the places that we work at. And we can stand to benefit from having, cleaner indoor air as well. But one thing I will emphasize, if we're not addressing the outdoor sources of pollution, we're not really cleaning, our air. So.
Definitely. And this is such a large transition. It encompasses so many different things that need to be done. And so, with that, what are the biggest challenges or systemic barriers you see to democratizing energy, the energy system, and especially to do with policy, if you have any?
That's a great question. One of the problems that I'm seeing is you can't always distinguish between some governments and corporations. And specifically an agency, and I'll name it, the California Public Utilities Commission. They're part of the problem. They're letting PG&E and all the other corporate utilities run amok on us, right? And so that's a big problem. And I think that system really needs a full gut because they're not holding PG&E accountable. A good example of them not holding PG&E accountable is the wildfire in Paradise that killed 85 people. If a corporation grossly mismanages their own infrastructure, even though we're paying for them to do so, right? And then it causes a wildfire so horrible that it kills people in the middle of the night. And then the agency, the Public Utilities Commission, bails them out and enables them to continue business as usual. That's a very broken system on our end, right? It's working, but for PG&E, not for us, not for the people. And so that's a problem. And another problem, another good example is net energy metering or the incentives for rooftop solar. The fact that, the utilities had that policy gutted, right, to prevent the people from owning their own clean energy is a full-on onslaught by the utilities. And it's not just here in California, but they're going state by state, gutting that policy. And so they're really trying to prevent us from owning our energy system, prevent us from building wealth from our own clean energy system. And that's their way of solidifying their power and keeping us dependent on them. There's no democracy in that structure. And so they're really trying to make sure we don't have a say. And so our fight at the local Clean Energy Alliance is to keep energy democratized as much as we can and fight to hold that door open and make sure that we have a next generation that has clean energy jobs and actually has a cleaner energy system than now. And so that's our responsibility. And it's hard work, tell you that.
I hear what you're saying, like addressing this issue of essentially an energy monopoly, like many other environmental issues, necessitates, multi-stakeholder engagement and cooperation that also prioritizes people's needs. And, that is a tough task. And I'm curious, how does your organization, Local Clean Energy Alliance, want to be involved in energy democratization, and how do you see the role of your group and other environmental justice groups evolving through this transition?
I really see us as a really powerful force. We're a tiny organization with a tiny budget, and I always use the metaphor of that, the childhood story of the little engine that could, because with very minimal resources, we're doing our best to really, uplift why we need to keep at this fight for energy democracy. And we've had some successes. We fought off that nuclear proposal in Ava Community Energy before. We're fighting it again. But then we're also advancing policies and local programs like advancing resilience hubs within our local community choice program and really holding them accountable to putting some of that money that we pay towards electricity and reinvesting it back into, resilience hub efforts from community-based organizations on the ground. So we have to be creative, we have to be fierce, and we have to bring people in. And a lot of the work that I do is to bring young people in, students, high school students, but also college age students, and then, just work with the general community. And another way that we've been doing that is to also do some all Spanish workshops on these different, like electrification, for example. Who do you know is doing Spanish, all Spanish monolingual workshops on electrification or energy issues? That's our way of democratizing energy, is to make it accessible. Because for a long time, very purposefully, this energy system was designed and very coded and full of jargon and full of acronyms so that we couldn't understand what people were talking about. And now we're breaking it down. So
Definitely. I think even just getting started working on this project and the project me and Maya worked on before this, there's so many acronyms and like we had no clue what we were reading or what people were saying to us because it's just so like if you don't know, then you have no clue where to even get started. So that's really awesome that you're making it more accessible. We wanted to talk about a little more about policy. We're kind of backtracking because you directly work with it and have so much knowledge in that area. But is there any specific policy changes that you think are really necessary to ensure that local communities and community-based energy solutions are prioritized in this transition to clean energy?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned the rollback on net energy metering, the attack on the local rooftop solar incentives, and we are challenging that. We actually filed to the California Supreme Court to challenge that decision by the California Public Utilities Commission, or the CPUC. And we heard back from the court that the court does want to hear our case. And so we'll be filing a brief this fall. And so again, it's just an example of a small organization doing the best that we can. We're actually being supported by a bunch of law students who are putting together this brief, right? And so they are learning in real time to be lawyers by helping us advance this effort to undo the damage that the CPUC has done in collaboration with the corporate utilities. So we're excited about that because we can say we're going to the Supreme Court. We've never done that before. So that's just an example of us trying to really reinstate, the good policy that is net energy metering. And as a result of that policy being gutted, a lot of jobs were lost. And so we need to also make a case that not only do we need to be growing more local solar in California, but these are the jobs that need to be reinstated. And so we're definitely challenging that.
Yeah. You spoke about how many issues in the current energy system stem from the major players, including, investor-owned utilities, but also community choice aggregations. In what ways can energy providers improve their engagement with underrepresented communities to ensure that their needs are met?
One of the things that I feel like needs to be said is oftentimes decision makers and entities like community choice programs think they know what they're doing, but if they're not actually engaging with the people who are directly affected by the bad energy practices, they're not doing the right thing. And I can guarantee that because the people who hold the actual solutions to these problems are the people who are directly affected and intimately understand how energy debt burden affects them, or what it's like to live by, an oil refinery or even a nuclear power plant. And if they're not engaging with the community, then they're definitely not doing it right. And so one of the things that we do with Ava Community Energy specifically is we advocate. We advocate very insistently and fiercely. And if they don't listen and they gloss over us, we're back again, making, setting our demand. And so a good example of that is in our Resilience Hubs campaign is they were trying to say, oh, we'll offer some solar and storage incentives, and that's our solution or our contribution to resilience hubs. And we're like, nope, hold on, there's so much more that we could be doing. And so we created a sign-on and started talking to different community-based organizations who are doing resilience hub work. And we're like, what is it that you're doing? What are your needs? If Ava Community Energy could provide you with resources and funding, what could you do with that? What are the possibilities? And so collecting all this information, bridging all those different organizations, and creating a network essentially to put pressure on the agency is what we've been doing. And now we have the full board saying, we need to agendize a full study session and do a scoping plan on resilience hubs. And we're right there saying, but you can't do that without the communities that are actually doing that work. And so they should be leading that study session. And we've had board members say, actually, you're right. Yeah, we need them there to show us what this is and what this could look like. And so we're making headway on something that we were actually being, ignored on, right? And this is a program that is a win for everybody. It's a win for our communities. It's a win for the agency. And it's something good. It's time for us to start seeing some good investments and good programs coming out of our community choice program. And so we're there to hold them accountable.
I totally hear what you're saying. I think it's so important to emphasize that for true equity, community involvement is like essential, because if you're not representing your communities and what people actually want, that's not very democratic. And so I just want to say thank you for being a great example, and leading by example.
And I wanted to add, I think it's so easy to feel discouraged when you start looking into environmental justice issues and all the environmental harm that's being done to so many communities. But I think all the work that you're doing and all you're accomplishing and just speaking to you is so inspiring that there is hope and there is things that can be done. And there are people working so hard to create more equity in environmental justice. That was all of our questions for you. If there's anything that you want to share or any advice you have for individuals who are looking to get more involved with the fight for energy justice, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Like I said, it's really important for a small organization like mine to bring in the voices of the people who are affected, the people who live by the power plants, the people who have the solutions that they want to put forth. It's going to take all of us. And so, when we go out there and challenge, the CPUC at the Supreme Court, we need people in California to support that. And so certainly inviting people to check out localcleanenergy.org and stay connected to us, because that's how we've been successful. And that's the only way we're going to be able to make change. So I always say clean power to the people.
I love that. Well, thank you, Jessica. We're so grateful that you took the time to be here with us today and for being our guest for our second episode.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. We really appreciate your time and all you've shared with us.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. We are interested in your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. Email us at john@slowclimatecoalition.org. Tell your friends about this podcast series so we can all grow together. Till next time.